Tonight, you are warm. You did not earn it. You did not plan for it. You tapped a button, pulled on a layer, and the problem solved itself in under a minute. You have never once had to fight winter. Not really. But for almost all of human history, winter was not an inconvenience. It was a predator. A slow, invisible, patient predator that did not chase you. It just waited. It waited for your fire to go out. It waited for your food to run out. It waited for you to fall asleep in the wrong place. And then it killed you. The last great ice age peaked around 26,000 years ago. Ice sheets more than a mile thick sat on top of Europe, Asia, and North America. Average temperatures across the northern hemisphere were 10 to 15 degrees colder than today. Not 10 degrees on a bad day. 10 degrees as the baseline. The floor. Every single day. For thousands of years. The land was open, flat, and windswept. Trees were rare. Food vanished for months at a time. And your ancestors, soft, hairless, African-born animals who had evolved in warmth, stood in the middle of all of it with nothing but their hands and their brains. On paper, they should have died. Every biological model says they should have died. They had no fur. No hibernation. No blubber layer. No natural adaptation for sustained extreme cold. A naked human in real ice age temperatures has hours before the body begins to shut down. Not days. Hours. And yet here you are. Which means every single one of them survived. Every one of your ancestors made it through at least one winter that should have killed them. The story of how they did it is not one trick. It is not one discovery. It is 1,000 small decisions, accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, each one solving a problem that would have ended the line. This is that story. The first thing you need to understand is what your body actually does in the cold. Because your body is not neutral about winter. It has opinions. Strong ones. Physiologist Takeshi Morita at Japan's National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health studied how human core temperature behaves under cold exposure. What he found is that the body has a strict priority list. When cold stress begins, blood is rerouted away from your extremities, your fingers, your toes, your nose, your ears, and concentrated around your core organs. Your brain. Your heart. Your lungs. The body decides very quickly that your fingers are optional and your heart is not. That is why frostbite hits the extremities first. Your body sacrificed them on purpose. This is the biology your ancestors were managing. Every winter. Every night. Every time the fire dipped low. And fire was everything. Humans had been using fire for at least 300,000 to 400,000 years by the time the last ice age peaked. But by that point, fire had evolved from a tool into something closer to a life support system. Archaeologist Dennis Sangates spent years excavating hearth sites in southern France and Belgium. What he found complicated everything researchers thought they knew about ancient fire use. Some hearths showed evidence of being deliberately extinguished and relit days later. Not by accident. Deliberately. His interpretation was striking. Ancient humans were rationing fire the way a dying person rations medication. They had fuel, they were cold, and they chose not to burn it. Because burning it now meant running out before the coldest weeks arrived. That is not instinct. That is planning. Abstract, future-oriented, self-denying planning. In temperatures that made every second without fire genuinely dangerous. Your ancestors were practicing the kind of delayed gratification that behavioral economists spend entire careers studying, but they were doing it tens of thousands of years ago, in caves, in the dark, while they were freezing. Out on the open plains of what is now Ukraine and Russia, where there were no caves and almost no trees, fire took on a different form entirely. Archaeologists excavating sites near Mazurek found fireplaces that had burned at over 600 degrees Celsius. Hotter than 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Far hotter than a standard wood fire. The fuel was not wood. It was bone. Specifically, the dense, fat-rich long bones of mammoths, which burned slow and hot and long. When the landscape gave you nothing to burn, you burned the landscape itself. You burned the bones of the largest animals on Earth and you stayed warm. But fire has one fatal limitation. You cannot take it with you. Step away from it and the cold is right there waiting. So your ancestors solved a problem that no other species on the planet had ever solved. They took warmth off of other animals and put it on themselves. The earliest evidence of this is older than you probably expect. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkaus, who has spent decades studying the skeletal remains of Ice Age humans and Neanderthals, found cut marks on bare paw bones at European sites dating back at least 300,000 years. The marks are precise. They are located exactly where you would cut to strip a skin cleanly off the paw without damaging the hide. These were not random butchery marks. These were the marks of someone who knew what they were doing. Who had done it before? Who was making a coat? A loose fur thrown over the shoulders is better than nothing. But it leaks heat through every gap. Cold air finds every opening. And a loose hide is not waterproof at the seams. It absorbs water, gets heavy, and in freezing temperatures, becomes a liability. What your ancestors needed was not a skin. They needed fitted clothing. That solution arrived around 30,000 years ago in the form of something so small it almost seems like a joke. A needle. A thin sliver of bone or ivory, sometimes just a few centimeters long, with a tiny hole drilled through one end. Archaeologist Olga Soffer, who studied Upper Paleolithic textile and clothing evidence extensively, called the bone needle one of the most consequential inventions in human history. She was not being dramatic. The needle meant stitching. Stitching meant fitted seams. Fitted seams meant closed cuffs at the wrist and ankle. Closed hoods. Layered insulation that stayed in place. The difference between a blanket on your shoulders and a coat that fits your body exactly is the difference between surviving a week in the Ice Age and surviving a decade. There is evidence that early modern humans had better fitted, more sophisticated clothing than Neanderthals did. Some researchers believe this gap, this small technological difference in stitching, may partly explain why one species made it through the worst of the Ice Age and one did not. They added refinements that still make sense today. Before going out into extreme cold, hunters rubbed animal fat, tallow rendered from boiled bones, over exposed skin on the face and neck. It sealed the skin against wind. It slowed the rate of heat loss from exposed areas. It was waterproofing applied directly to the body. Simple, practical, and based on a precise understanding of how wind chill kills. Out on the open snowfields, there was another danger your ancestors had to solve that most people never think about. Snow blindness. The reflected ultraviolet light off a bright snow surface can damage the cornea within hours. It is not just uncomfortable. It is temporarily debilitating. A blind hunter in the Ice Age is a dead hunter. The solution was carved from bone or wood, thin strips tied across the eyes with narrow slits cut through them. The slits reduced the amount of light entering the eye by more than 90%. They were functional, effective, and they were the first sunglasses ever made. 30,000 years before any optician existed. But clothing in fire and vision protection could only keep you alive tonight. The deeper problem of winter was not the cold itself. It was the hunger. For months at a time, there was almost nothing to gather. Plants were dead. Berries were gone. Rivers were frozen. The animals that had not migrated were lean and scarce and hard to find. And a human body burning extra calories to maintain core temperature in extreme cold needs significantly more food than it does in warmth, not less. You are burning more and finding less. That equation kills slowly and then suddenly. Anthropologist Will Robrooks, studying Neanderthal and early modern human sites across Europe, found evidence of what he called strategic seasonal hunting. Kill sites were not random. They were located at specific natural bottlenecks, river crossings, narrow valleys, cliff edges, where migratory herds of reindeer and wild horses passed on predictable schedules. These locations were used not once but repeatedly, for tens of thousands of years. The same spot. The same season. The same strategy. This was not opportunistic hunting. This was an annual food production system built around intimate knowledge of animal behavior across generations. When a kill happened, nothing was wasted. The meat was smoked, dried, and stored. Fat was rendered and sealed in bone containers, fat specifically, because fat carries nearly twice the caloric density of protein. Organs were eaten first. Marrow was cracked from every bone. At some sites there is evidence of meat being weighted down and submerged in cold ponds or streams to preserve it longer. A natural refrigerator, using the same principle as the one in your kitchen, but built from rocks and cold water and applied knowledge. The storage was not random either. Food caches were buried at known locations, sometimes marked with stones or carved symbols. This knowledge, where the cache was, how old it was, how much was left, was not written down. It lived inside people. It was transmitted through story and repetition and memory. Losing the person who held that knowledge was not just a personal tragedy. It was a logistical crisis for the entire group. And this brings you to the part of the survival story that is hardest to quantify but may have mattered most. The shelter was not just physical. It was social. At Mazirik, archaeologists found circular houses built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Skulls and femurs formed the base. Ribs and tusks curved up into the frame. Hundreds of individual bones in a single structure. The houses were sunk partially into the ground, which provided insulation, and packed with hides, moss, and earth. The design included a feature that predates any written understanding of thermodynamics by tens of thousands of years. The entrance was lower than the sleeping area. Cold air is denser than warm air. It sinks. By positioning the doorway below floor level, the cold air pooled at the entrance while the warmer air rose toward the sleeping space. Your ancestors had engineered passive climate control out of dead giants. Inside those shelters, multiple families slept in close physical contact. Not by preference. By survival calculation. Evolutionary biologist Robin Dunbar, whose research on primate social bonding transformed how scientists understand human group behavior, has shown that physical closeness in humans triggers measurable releases of endorphins and oxytocin, the same neurochemicals associated with pain relief and social bonding. The long, dark, cold months of winter may have been the period when the deepest human bonds were formed. Not despite the hardship. Because of it. Shared suffering, shared warmth, shared survival, these were the conditions under which trust was built at the biological level. But the cold had one more weapon that clothing and fire and shelter and food could not fully defeat. And it attacked from the inside. Psychiatrist Norman Rosenthal, who first formally identified and named seasonal affective disorder in 1984, discovered through years of clinical research that reduced light exposure in winter causes measurable, predictable changes in brain chemistry. Serotonin levels drop. Melatonin production shifts. Circadian rhythms are disrupted. In a clinical setting, this produces depression, cognitive slowing, and loss of motivation. In a survival setting, in a cave, in darkness, in February, with the food running low and the fire burning smaller, it could produce something far more dangerous. The conviction that spring was not coming. That trying was not worth it. Hopelessness, in a survival scenario, is a cause of death. Your ancestors built something to fight it. Your ancestors painted their way through winter. Not as a hobby. As a survival technology for the mind. And then there is the strangest chapter in this story. One that science is still actively debating. At a site in Spain called the Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, paleoanthropologists studying the remains of early human ancestors from approximately 430,000 years ago found something in the bone structure that did not fit any expected pattern. The growth rings inside the bones showed cyclical, seasonal interruptions. Periods of dramatically slowed growth that aligned with winter months. The pattern matched, with striking consistency, what you see in the bones of animals that hibernate. Bone researcher Juan Luis Arzuaga and his colleagues proposed a hypothesis that most scientists initially dismissed as too extreme, that these early humans, lacking sufficient fat reserves and caloric resources to survive a brutal winter through activity alone, may have entered a state of metabolic slowdown. A deep, extended torpor. Not full hibernation as a bear performs it. But something functionally close. A slowing of the heartbeat, a drop in core body temperature below the normal waking threshold, a reduction in caloric consumption profound enough to make survival possible where active wakefulness would have meant starvation. The debate continues. Other researchers propose different explanations for the bone evidence. But the hypothesis has not been dismissed. Because the math of survival in a deep ice age winter sometimes simply does not add up any other way. And the body has never entirely lost the biological machinery for it. The chemicals that regulate torpor in hibernating mammals, adenosine, certain neuropeptides, exist in human biology in modified forms. What that means is a question researchers are still asking. What it means for you is simpler. Every winter, your body still sends the same signals. Slow down. Sleep longer. Eat heavier food. Seek warmth and closeness. Withdraw from open spaces. It is not a mood disorder. It is not a character flaw. It is a 300,000-year-old operating system running exactly as designed, in a world that has forgotten what it was designed for. The next time winter makes you want to stay inside, to sleep past the alarm, to eat something dense and warm, to sit close to someone you trust and stare at something flickering, you are not being lazy. You are not being weak. You are running the same code that kept your ancestors alive through ice sheets a mile thick. Through winters that lasted not months but years. Through cold that killed everything around them while they, somehow, stayed alive. They made it. By fire and bone needle and painted cave walls and the warmth of bodies pressed together in the dark. And somehow, impossibly, so did you. You are still here. In the warmth you did not have to earn. In a season your ancestors spent everything they had just to survive. That warmth is not ordinary. You just forgot to notice it.